Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our next installment of our Q&A in 2024. And we are thrilled tonight to have an expert and historian known to know everything about the Overbrook Asylum in northern New Jersey.
I don't know about everything, but I know a little bit.
Welcome, Melissa. We're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us
Yay,
tonight.
thank you for having me.
We plan to have an awesome conversation about Overbrook Asylum, which has been featured on shows like Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters, correct?
Yep, Weird New Jersey, all of it.
All of it, all the good stuff.
Popular location.
hmm Well, it's a popular location, especially now that it's no longer even standing, correct?
Yeah.
So, just to give everyone a quick background, which you can elaborate on in case I get anything wrong or you want to add information to it. So, Overbrook Asylum was originally built on about 200 plus acres of land
Mhm.
where they built not only a hospital and asylum, but they also built like a farmhouse and they had farmland and bakery and everything
It
so
was
that
a
they
full
could be a
city.
self-sufficient
A
full
full,
city, a
full
mini
city.
mini, and the asylum was host to those with mental illness. And at one point in time in about the 20s, they were full capacity
Hmm.
until the lovely invention of medications came about for mental illness, and then the patients dwindled, and over time, the it eventually became demolished at this
Hmm.
point now.
Yeah.
So there have been talks. There's two parks on the land currently, but there has been talks of building some townhomes, but that hasn't started yet. Did I get that right?
No, they're probably not going to build, from what I know as of today. And if they build anything, they can't. It's all reserved now that they can't. The
Okay.
whole Overbrook and Hilltop, and I'll refer to both of them because Overbrook is the lower part that was by the river, hence Overbrook. And then the top part was the hilltop where it was separated into two facilities. The lower part was what we would call the psychiatric facility, and the upper part was actually a medical facility for TB or tuberculosis, the consumption, whatever you want to call it, back in the day. Because it was open air and it was up on the mountain. It was great for therapies and stuff. But there was a lot of flow between the two facilities and the part you forgot to mention, the jail just beyond the hilltop over in
Yeah.
like the Caldwell area. So those three facilities all kind of interacted. And even prior to what we think of as Overbrook, even going further down toward like where Verona High School was, there was facilities there for young men and little boys and girls, like kids facilities, like orphans, things like that. So this complex was enormous.
Yes.
The stuff closer to Verona High School, they got rid of quickly, but the lower part, like I said, was the psychiatric part, and that's where you found some of the farmland, but not all. Some of it was on the hilltop too, because the inmates at the jail would farm up top too. They had a full like slaughterhouse, greenhouses, their own power facility. They even had an ice um, harvesting lake. They had everything. So that's how kind of it was split up. And then as time went on, as TB became not so much of a problem, the top part kind of dwindled down and the hospital closed, and then just the lower part was left. And then up until not that long ago, like 2007, that was the very end of it. And now it's all gone, except for a few little things. Few little
Yeah.
things.
So it was basically built to be self-sufficient,
Yes.
right? And it was also, if I recall, the history of it was they kind of took that area of Newark to build up the city, right?
Well, we weren't even our township that we are now, where we are in town that we're in right now, is Cedar Grove.
Yeah.
This whole area was actually part of an area known as now we're talking way back, colonial times, was known as Horseneck, and it encompassed everything from Newark all the way to like Montville, like the whole way, Fairfield, Montville, the Caldwells, the Oranges, Verona, Cedar Grove, even parts of like Wayne and Pequannock were considered part of this area. And there was like a Dutch line that split it. That's where Passaic and Essex County kind of split up and like a whole thing. So technically it belonged to Newark, but Newark was also part of the county, so it was the counties. So it's depending on what you read and what histories you look in, you'll get a different version of the story. But the property itself, when the facility was first built, was technically part of Caldwell. Not even Verona existed yet.
Oh wow.
So yeah, because it was the
Yeah.
1890s or something, like 1880s, 1890s. It wasn't really Verona. It was called Verona, like that was the area, just like Cedar Grove was called Cedar Grove. But it was like an area of town, like a borough almost, like part of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. I just found an article about Overbrook that said almost what you were saying, Gail. It was like saying that, well, the Newark facility closed, and
Yes.
it's talking about this being Newark, and there is a hospital in Newark, that is closed, but it's not the same.
It was the
here.
predecessor to this.
Yes.
So a lot of people confuse it. You can't, I think it was on South Orange Avenue, if my memory serves me. I want to say it's near where Rutgers is now, the hospital. But I'm not positive because it's not one of those things I could find and like look for the building, because the building didn't exist anymore. I don't know. I mean, I could Google it up and search it up and find it, but I didn't really get that into it. I was like, nah, I'm more worried about Cedar Grove. Newark can wait.
Yeah.
That facility was outdated, which is why they looked to Overbrook, and they thought that like open air was better than the city, that they could have gardens and therapy. So that's why they picked this area.
Right. Yeah. How many people? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, how many people would you say that the facility could hold at one time?
Maximum? Well, here's the thing. They upped it a bunch of times. They had people outside in tents. So even if they were at their max, they could put people outside. And they did often, especially on the hilltop. You can find pictures if you look online. You will see they had these open. They called it open air therapy. It was really tense outside. It's really what it was. And they had like fire pits, like little bonfires and things like that. I should have prepped some slides and things because I could have shared them with you, but another time. But yeah, so they could
really do a part two.
yeah, we can. We can do a part two, and I'll prep ahead. But you could have gone beyond capacity if they wanted to easily, because there was so much property. They can put them outside.
Yeah. Well, I actually read something about the elements where there was one winter where they didn't have heating, right? Like something with the water heater or the boiler broke, and
now,
a lot.
This date, no. This one I know. I got this one right. So it was December 21st of 1917. This one I've memorized because I've read this New York Times article more times than I'd like to say, and seen it referenced so much that it's like a visual in my head. Basically, it was a rough winter. We had a real, like, not just a cold snap. We had like a deep freeze. I think even like the Hudson and the East Rivers, these flows going through them, it was a cold winter. So some of the ferries couldn't run, things like that. So it got really cold here to the point where they lost between 20 and 25 inmates. They died. They froze to death in their beds. Then other inmates, frostbite, losing fingers, toes, things like that. It was so bad that they asked they called them inmates, any of the inmates' families to come get them because it was that bad. And it was so bad that it made it to the New York Times. So that's when it's bad. Yeah.
That's when you know it's bad. So
that's when you know it's bad.
Jumping into some of the activity on the location, do you feel that plays a part in possibly, because, a lot of activities, a buildup of energy. So when you have something like that, I can't imagine dying, like freezing to death literally in your bed is a good way to go. Do you think that could contribute to some of the energy there?
Oh, absolutely. And not even just that, but there were so many deaths. Because you remember, it was a hospital and a psychiatric facility, and so many people died. They had a morgue on site. They did not have a crematorium. They did not bury the bodies there, but they did send them off to whomever they needed to go to. But you have to think of where it was located, the amount of people that went through those doors, and there was a lot of death. And not all of it, obviously, freezing to death is awful. But some of it was natural, like especially up top, the TB patients, they were sick. And other patients, I'm sure, as you read online, there was lots of psychological experimentation, lobotomies, shock therapy, hydrotherapy, like all sorts of things went on up there. So, but not unusual for that time period in medical studies.
Right.
So it was considered humane, but nowadays would not fly. So yes, is there definitely some sort of EBGB energy up there? Heck yeah. Definitely. Walk through there at night, I dare you.
I mean, challenge accepted, if that's an invitation.
It's spooky. I mean, I even remember I had to go there to get my sub-cert, and I had to go inside when it was still open. This is way back. And I needed my sub-certificate. This was probably like late 90s. And I guess the Essex County superintendent's office must have been in there. And that's why I go to bring my paperwork.
They put the county offices in there for education.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. And that place, sitting there like in the chair, like reading, I was like, it's creepy. And I'm not one of those people. Like, I'm not like, oh, Like, I'm not, Kara will tell you, I'm not like a big ghost person, but like, I think it's fun. I think it's cool, but like, I never had experiences. You know what I mean? So I was like, this place is creepy. So yeah,
So
definitely.
you're a healthy skeptic. That's what you would call
Yeah,
yourself.
like I believe in anything. Like, not that I believe in anything, but I'm minded to anything. So just you can't prove it. You don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So now that we have a little bit of a background on Overbrook and we have a little bit of the understanding of the patients and the energy that's possibly there, maybe we can dive into a little bit more of the paranormal end of things that we would love to discuss with you. Kara, did you have something that you wanted to discuss first?
I, coming from the town, and you obviously coming from the town, what do you think is the biggest paranormal lore to come out of that area?
Oh God, that's a tough question
I know.
because there's so. I mean, everyone's convinced it's haunted.
Right.
Convinced. I mean, there's so many. I mean, there's so many stories. Everything from creeps in the tunnel. Everything. There's so many
I was
stories.
going to say the two biggest ones that I remember hearing about most
Okay.
in the area is the creeper in the tunnel,
Yep.
and that there's the black creeper that looks kind of, I don't know how you would explain it. It's like a spindly, spiderly, creepy little thing. Well, not real little. He's kind of big thing in
Yeah.
the tunnel. And the moving doll isn't,
Yes.
well, there's the moving CPR doll that it was in a different room every time people would go in. Because what would happen is after they started closing it, party goers would go as kids do and break in and party in the vacant buildings. And they would always report that there would be a CPR doll that they would have part of their festivities. And every time they would go, the CPR doll had been moved, and yeah, it would move throughout. It would move throughout the building.
Yeah.
Oh,
And sometimes
interesting.
while they were there.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes while they were there. Some of the
And
stories.
sometimes while they were there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like
Oh,
they'd be in one room, they turn around, it's gone. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
interesting. That's
Yeah.
super cool.
Yeah.
I
That's
read something about a big black tall figure with like where people could see its spine. Is that the spidery thing you were
that
talking
might be the
about?
creeper in the tunnel thing.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
it's like I heard it described as a tall apparition, kind of hunched over with its spine kind of like showing a little
Yeah.
bit.
It could be a combination of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I
But the
mean,
creeper in the tunnel freaks me out. Because the tunnel,
yeah,
there's no through the tunnels, so
Yeah.
they're creepy.
So have
they
you
are.
personally experienced either of those?
No, thank God. Because I would have been bye. No, I
Yeah.
hadn't. But Carrie, you might have a little bit more to that.
Well, no, honestly, I never went in there because I didn't want to get arrested because there was a huge police presence there. Maybe not as much when I was younger as it was getting more and more popular with partiers, I would say, but there was a huge police presence, and they would always be patrolling it and go and sweeping through it up until it was closed.
Yeah,
I would hear of, I'm sorry.
absolutely, because I would hear it. I know I shouldn't say this, but we have the police radio. My husband volunteers and is a professional fireman, so we have the police radio going all the time, and you would hear, even when I was at my in-laws and I would be at their house in Verona, you would hear them. We're the county radio. We're going to check the hilltop out, things like that.
Yeah.
Always, and you would see them because I drove past constantly because I live right here. So constantly, they were always in there.
Right. So it became more difficult, but to get in. But those two stories are the two biggest stories, and I think those were the ones that were reported on mostly on television programs and whatever, that they went to go look for that creeper with the spine thing in the tunnels, and yeah, and those and that type of thing. Yeah. And I just had another question. How did you get into doing all this research on Overbrook?
COVID. Okay, so on this format, I think I can talk about work. I'm a teacher, and I'm a teacher of the gifted and talented, and it happens to be here in Cedar Grove. And long story short, we do this project every year, this Panther Pride project, but we were supposed to present like 2 weeks after we got shut down. Like that's when we were supposed to come back and present our projects. We never opened back up in March. So all the kids' Panther Pride and research projects kind of just sat and collected dust. So one of the kids goes, "Hey, Mrs. Hill," while we're like doing some work and trying to get through the pandemic, navigating education at this point, said, "Do you know why my street's named whatever Bradford Avenue?" And I went, "I don't know." I said, "I know why my block's named what my block is because I happen to know the history of my street and how the development developed." And that got everyone talking. So we just started with our streets and we started researching. And like 2 or 3 weeks later, the kids were like, what about the hospital center? What was the deal with that, Mrs. Hill? I'm like, "Oh, I'll tell you what I know." And then we started researching. So that research budded into this whole, I could tell you why the town developed. I could tell you crazy things about residents. I've got all sorts of stuff about Cedar Grove, and it all came from kids. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. That's how it all started. It was just like, hey.
Now, do they bring up any of the paranormal lore?
Well, I have a student who currently lives up there, and I have him scoping things out. So far, nothing. Because now they're all condos, and when Kara and I were approached about doing the show that we just did, I asked him flat out, I said, "You think your house is haunted?" He goes, "I don't know, Miss Hill, but I'm gonna check it out." Yeah, but so he's doing some investigative research of his own, and he's gonna let me know. But I can't imagine there not being. It's just a stupid place.
Right. Like I've always said that's like my biggest thing. Like I want to do a study or an article on the people that live there over longitudinally, and not only just that, like what do they like? I know it's condos and I know everything is like manicured and all that other kind of stuff, but like what do you find in the ground? I mean, you can't tell me that you're not going to go outside one day and barbecue ribs and find, like a piece of something from a bed or, there has to be
because on the other side, the park side, you can find stuff constantly. Like if you really look, especially like where I got the bricks and stuff like that, where I told you could find things, I'm sure there is stuff up there. And like, I also sometimes when I like to walk to the hilltop part and come down, and I notice on the loop down, sometimes you kind of like look down into the valley and you get this like heavy feeling, like it's just like, whew, a lot happened up here, And here I am having my la-di-da stroll,
right.
little world. But it does weigh heavy on me.
So the condos that your student lives in is actually on the grounds or just like next to it?
They're on the actual footprint of the property. Like they're all in there. That whole area, all the main store, that's where the condos were built.
Okay. So not exactly where the asylum was, but on the 200
on the property. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Like the asylum part was on the bottom part, the Overbrook part, and that's where they built all those condos. They're right there on that property.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like you drive down the street that went through there, you'll see it. The condo, well, you can't miss it. They're condos. The condos are on one side, and then there's like park and on the other.
And the park side really wasn't much. That was where like the parking lot and stuff was. So where the park and the community center there wasn't much there. That was open land parking, things like that. 'Cause that was on the side of it. But the middle part where they built all the condos, that's where the main complex is. And it was multiple buildings. It wasn't just like one structure. There was all different structures built at different times. Some were torn down, some were still up. But that basic area, that circumference of where the stuff was, that's where they rebuilt.
Wow. So do you think, I don't know if you know of exact experiences or just theories, but like for people to live on the same land or possibly even to take objects from where this asylum was home with them, you would imagine that there's some kind of energy and activity that goes along with that.
Maybe. Maybe. I don't have any proof, but maybe.
Yeah.
I told you guys earlier, before we started recording, when everything was demolished, I did take, for historical purposes to show my students, I did take a brick. I went and got one. It's at school though, so it's not here in my house, and it will never come home because you planted the seed and it's never coming here, ever.
That's probably a wise move, just in case.
Never coming here. Nope, not happening. It's staying where it is at school.
That's funny. So at the height of the number of people. We talked about how they were outside and everything.
Yeah.
At that height, how many people do you think at any one time was on the facility ground?
Oh, that I'd have to double check that. I'd have to check.
Like hundreds
Um,
or thousands?
we're gonna go with, I would say, probably around 1,000 people because, but I would say 500 to 1,000 because I know there was times where they had like 50 deaths in a month. So you have to start doing the math of how many people could
Right.
have been there. And obviously that one winter where it was really bad, they lost like 150 that month. It was a bad month. Um, so there's times they had, because remember, it was a full functioning hospital, just like a regular hospital. I'm sure if you go down to UMDMJ or St. Barnabas, they'll probably give you similar stats of how many people die. So when you think about it, it's not a small number. It's probably quite a large number.
Yeah, 1,000.
Yeah, which is,
And this was before the current psychiatric practices where
mhm.
they probably were just told, "Oh, get some fresh air," and maybe do you happen to know if they performed any type of electroshock
Yes.
therapy or anything?
When and this was the part that was hard when you're researching with students is sometimes I would come across some of that stuff and I'm like, no, we're not going to look into that right now. But obviously, curiosity kills the cat. I have to look it up later on. And like many practices of the time, shock therapy was used. Frontal lobotomies were done. Um, I mean, indicative of the time, people would cut left brain from right brain. I don't know if they necessarily did it at Overbrook, but that was a common practice in psychological medicine back then. I also know that they did also have hydrotherapy, which were these high spray hoses. There's actually photographic evidence of where they would like blast them, almost like pinpricks, I guess is the way to explain it.
Okay.
And had like also like baths, like soothing baths and things like that. So not everything was horrible, but some of it wasn't very good.
Right. It was standard for the time,
Yes,
but as we
those
know now,
practices,
that doesn't make it a good practice.
yeah, absolutely not. I mean, they also had them gardening and doing work outside and like being with the animals and things like that too. They even had recreational facilities. They had a baseball team. They had a basketball team. They had all that.
Yeah, I read that they had a semi-pro baseball team.
They did. Yep.
That's
Little Field of
crazy.
Dreams down there.
That's great. Now that I did not know. I did not know they had a team.
Yeah, they did. You can find, if you Google it, you'll find pictures. They do exist. So, and the
Of
field
it
was
was it
lower.
inmates or like employees?
It was no, I think they initially it was inmates, but I think employees were allowed to play if they wanted to as well. But you'll see a lot of the pictures that you see, they're mostly inmates
That's interesting.
that played. Mhm.
That's interesting. So since then, obviously, currently the facility has been demolished to the ground, correct?
Mhm.
And other than the condos that were kind of built on the lower area that you spoke about, it's pretty much been untouched because it's a park facility.
Yeah.
So since then, before it was demolished, what kind of paranormal activity occurred there other than the creepy guy in the tunnel? What is this tunnel you guys were talking about?
Okay,
And the
so
creepy guy.
there are tunnels. I wish I had slides to show you. There are tunnels, like access tunnels that ran things like the gas line, the water pipes, like maintenance tunnels. Um,
Underground
that
tunnels.
ran underneath the entire property. And obviously, the workers used them to transfer. It was easier, just go down tunnels and shoot to where you had to get to access if there was a leak here or if there was a problem there. However, because they were accessible, people could get in there, even the inmates.
Oh,
And then use your imagination. All sorts of tomfoolery, I'm sure, was occurring down in those tunnels. Lots of stories. And I'm sure they were also quite spooky. If you look again, I wish I had slides. If you look at the pictures of them, they are creepy. Like, ooh, not a place you want to be.
probably not.
Definitely not. There actually are a few. I don't know if the tunnels are still there. I'm assuming at least on the lower part where the condos are. I'm assuming when they had to build everything, those were gone. I don't know if there's anything up top. In terms of buildings left, just one garage is left that was next to the greenhouses, and the county's using that as a garage. Shocker. And then there's the Alaris building, which was Wright's Pavilion, which was the geriatric facility on the complex. And it still is kind of because now it's Alaris Health, which is also for the elderly and a rehab. So it kind of has the same purpose. And other than that, there's really nothing left. Just some walls, stones, things like that that you can find.
And it has been investigated several times
Mhm,
before it was demolished.
mhm.
So this creepy spidery thing, you said you haven't experienced it, but what are some of the stories you've heard about that?
Okay. I'll tell. There's a lot of different versions. You'll hear a lot of them are kids, or but even sometimes regular people just being in there, but kids sneaking in
Regular.
and regular, normal, like adults. Not just the teenagers being teenagers, but like other curious folks going in and checking it out, and they report seeing an apparition of some type that either resembles a giant spider or a large skeleton type creature with a very um, prominent backbone and not your typical legs and arm limbs, but multiple limbs. So that's another iteration that I've heard stories about, and coming out of nowhere, rising up, scaring people, or coming around a corner and there it was, and then they, got out of dodge, kind of thing. So that story, various versions of that story I've heard. Kara did a very good job explaining the CPR dummy. That's another one. But even people who go up there, I will tell you, people that either police, fire, people who've been up there for various reasons, like teenagers would set fires to the mattresses and stuff, or the old files. You would talk to the police and fire that were up there, and they would tell you it's creepy. It's not not a fun place to be. Yeah.
It's funny because police officers obviously are professional and are serious, but they probably have the most sense of paranormal activity and experience the most and are empathetic to the most. Like police officers talk about it all the time, where they're just like, so this happened on this case that I went to. So that makes sense. That makes sense that police and firemen, like as being there patrolling, would have some of their own experiences.
Yeah. It just that sense of being watched too. That a few people I know who've been up there at night for like fire calls or for like police calls that I've spoken to, just police officers even just here in our town talking about it back in the day, and you just get that feeling that you're not by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Was there any stories of activity before it was demolished? Or before it was shut down, I should say. So before 2007, like when it was still an active facility.
Yes, because they abandoned the hilltop. Up top, you got to remember there was a lot of buildings that, even though they still had the property, and there were a lot of buildings still standing, but were not being used. So people would sneak into them. They were in various states of disrepair. So a lot of these stories, especially the more recent ones, are from when it was shut down, but not 100% down. Does that make sense? Like the lower, like the county offices that were there, like off of Fairview Avenue, that they were still using, those were still being used, but there were so many other parts of the facility that weren't used.
While it was part of that transition of going from a super active, full facility to shutting down, there were investigations or curious people that would show up and had experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
So besides the creepy Spider-Man and the CPR doll, do you know of any other lore on the facility? I heard something about sigils and stuff.
Oh,
I read somewhere.
People would sneak in, and I honestly think it's very indicative of any of these places. People would sneak in and have little seances and have experiences. You call to it, it's going to come. So there's lots of stories like that out there. A lot of them aren't as published because people don't want to get in trouble for trespassing. But you would hear rumors and stories. I'm trying to think, Kara, can you think of anything else? I'm trying to think. Most of the stories are like people are in there and they're creeped out. That's most.
Yeah. I mean, I now if you drive through there, I mean, maybe, depending on your sensitivity level, too, you drive through that area, and as soon as you can feel the difference driving along that road. It's like you're driving and then all of a sudden you're like, ooh, it just gets heavy, like right in that area. There, like you said, there's sigils and stuff. People will go into those woods, or they would go into the building, and they would carve the sigils into the trees, or they would spray paint them, and they would do, whatever rituals, or think they're doing a ritual, in the area. It was a story of a guy, because see, when I was growing up here, some of the people that live there were allowed to leave the facility. They were like, there was like total inpatient, and there was partial patient, and then there were people that were allowed into the community to go shop, and then they had to report back at night, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when we were growing up here, if somebody did not make it back or escape, they would blow a foghorn.
Yep.
And, so it was kind of like, somebody didn't show up,
Right.
And there's a story of somebody who actually didn't show up and tried to, I think they either carjacked, they murdered somebody.
They didn't murder someone. They basically kidnapped basically harassed a local housewife. There's 2 versions of the story. Well, 3 versions. One has a knife, one has a hammer, one has both.
Right.
And it depends on the word of mouth and how it's passed on. But most stories have the knife. He broke into the house with the intent of taking her car to get the heck out of here. And they did. This is back in 78.
Mm.
And I couldn't tell you what month, but it was back in 78. And they did arrest him out in Pennsylvania. They got him. They took the wife's car, and got out there. But that story has evolved. He murdered a baby, and like all that stuff that happens when you play the game of telephone. This person says it, then that person says it. But that scared a lot of the people in the community. Were very scared about that. Anyone you talk to from town. I just spoke with another one of our coworkers today about it, actually, and she's like, every time that horn would go off, I was petrified. Like my mom would run and lock the doors. And this is in a time when people didn't lock their doors. Kids stayed out until the streetlights came on. This was a time where you didn't do that. But here there was always that hold up, and always that check around who's with you and who's with the kids, that kind of thing. So
the foghorn was really as a warning to the community to be like, hey guys, heads up, we lost one of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they lost them indefinitely. Like they never came back. There are multiple reports of inmates that never came back. They just said toodaloo.
Wow.
Those things are funny. I've read a bunch of them, and every time I read one, I go, I can't believe they lost humans. If we did this today, we'd all be fired.
Yeah, like I can't imagine being on the receiving end. We lost Aunt Pearl. Like what? Like what happened? Where are these people?
Pearl's out there all by herself.
Yeah. And
Yes.
you have to think, and I know it's talking about Overbrook, but you have to think when these people left. And they were given free roam of the community or whatever, it's like whatever is attached to them, they're tracking through the whole town, and I remember like, I'm about like a mile and not even 1.3 miles away from the first main entrance of the asylum. Okay. My friend growing up, my best friend, her house abutted the back of the asylum. And I remember her when it was in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, she would call me on the phone and she was like, yes, there's a naked man in my backyard and the police are tackling him and they're bringing him back. And it keeps going back to the foghorn. It's like, you heard that foghorn, you knew what was going down. You didn't know.
Like that. But then I wonder how people become nose blind. They become ear blind. They're like, it just, the foghorn went off. Okay. There's tons of those stories though. Tons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because even I remember even too, my mother, she accidentally, like she saw an old woman walking in the rain. I must have been 8 years old. My mother picked her up and asked her where she wanted to take her. And my mother drove her to Overbrook and dropped her off.
Oh my God.
It was one of these moments. Don't tell your father, one of those. Don't tell dad,
Also, Dad, I picked up a crazy lady on the street.
Yeah. That was an interesting car ride home.
Oh my God.
But when you think of those experiences and growing up here and the people that grew up here in the shadow of that,
And honestly, I think that made the town, because so much of our development as a town, many of the homes along Route 23, Pennsylvania Avenue, Grove, they were boarding homes for the workers. I mean, even our first tavern, that's how we got a sidewalk, because everyone was walking down to the tavern and they didn't want people to get hit by cars in the street anymore. So they put sidewalks in. I mean, like, because of all these people. And we had the train station also because of Overbrook Station. and that I think the town developed how it did around that because it was there first. I don't.
Right.
We'd probably still be part of Verona if
Right.
Verona hadn't been there.
And so when you take it that extra step and you see this whole community that was born out of, trauma or people that worked with trauma and grew up around it and in that energy. I mean, you're talking hundreds of acres of just, sadness, loneliness, health, confusion,
anger.
Yes. Anger, and not even to say to throw upon the prison on top of that. That was like the extension of, you've got some really funky mojo going on in that area that really, when you interview people around here, they're probably not even aware of what they're sensing is different than what, say, somebody, in a different area that didn't have that. What we think is normal might be weird to somebody else, but because we're just used to those happenings happening.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like your entire town, your entire neighborhood has literally developed and evolved around the existence of this facility. So there's no way that energy can't bleed into it a little bit.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked, that there's not to say that there's like, a cover up or anything. No, I'm not saying that at all. But because of what was there and because everybody grew up around it, I'm sure that some of the shenanigans that went on up at the hospital were lost or not communicated, because, who wants to willingly know that they're living in the place where there were lobotomies, it's nobody.
Right.
Nobody.
Everybody, you're having like a poltergeist moment where you find out your house is built over like a burial ground, and you're like, "Why is my kitchen chair's moving?"
Right.
If you really want to add a trifecta in of spookiness, this whole area was Native American land. So there you go.
Chef's kiss.
Just to throw it out.
Got it off.
Just put the cherry on the sundae.
I couldn't resist. It was there. You open that door for me. I had to go there.
Yeah, well, you have to think if you have a 200 plus acre facility that is now parkland. I mean, all of that was Native American land at some point. So I'm sure even just walking through the park, which is public, right? Anybody can walk through the park right now.
Right.
Like, I'm sure there has to be, at the very least, a vibe when you're walking through
even,
there.
along the train tracks, like just to go on the Native American tangent in there, the river, the little river we have is called the Peckman. The Peckman actually comes from the native word peckamin or peckamin, however you want to say it, that means cranberry. So even it's just, and the trails, like the Lenape Trail runs through here, through the whole area, right through this town. That's where the train tracks went. It's part of the Lenape Trail. So
That's so interesting. Yeah.
Very
layers of different energy backgrounds and activity there.
Yeah, it's a recipe for paranormal. It's just
little native,
little trauma, little asylum, little jail,
little body action. We're good.
Yeah, hydrotherapy. I mean, the one thing, and maybe I'm wrong, but the one thing I don't usually hear about, as opposed to like say some of the other noted asylums, is we don't hear about like a doctor that was known for.
No, they had a couple superintendents, but those superintendents really weren't. I mean, they probably were doctors, obviously, if they need to have some sort of medical background. And they had doctors that lived at the facility. Right when you would come in off of Fairview, there was an area called Doctors Row, and there was like 4 or 5 houses. There were cute little brick houses that they put in that were where the doctors lived. So these doctors not only worked here, they lived here too. So that may be why you don't hear about anything too cruel or too unusual, because I think it would be hard as a resident. Like, if you're vested, it's also your home and you have your children there too. It's a little, you know how people don't mix work and pleasure kind of thing. So
blurred lines.
Yeah, I don't know. But then again, we don't know because the record keeping was not great. So or any of those facilities.
Oh, I'm sure if a specific doctor was doing something out of the ordinary, it was probably covered up anyway, being such a
Right.
large facility.
Right. Speaking of the children, we'll go back to dun, dun, dun. Even after the place closed, they kept the daycare center that was on the property open past the closing of the facility, and my children went to it.
Oh.
So the daycare facility on the property was run by the county, and it was for county workers and people that worked at the facility to bring their children while they worked. That has also been torn down, and now there's houses there as well. But my two were the last class, or they were there when the place finally shut down.
Okay.
So you have an entire few generations of children also, not only that were residents of the facility because they were sick or what have you, but even the people who lived there, their children were immersed in the same energies that came from the hospital center.
That's interesting. And did your boys like ever experience anything while they were there?
They were two. They don't remember.
Okay.
They don't remember, but I remember, like when you, it's hard to explain. It was a cubicle building. It was a square building. Yeah. And you walk in and it was just claustrophobic. It was just like this rectangle with windows that went, all around, right? Mm-hmm. And it just looked like a tall rectangular building. It was 3 floors. Yep. It was 3 floors. The meals were brought in actually for the children, like school, but they were brought in from, say, the hospital center. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. What were you going to say?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They ate the same food that the patients ate.
Yep.
That's what I was going to say.
So, I mean, like, I would bring the boys there, and they were getting fish sticks with carrots and green beans and juice with the little cup.
I literally was going to say it, like, picture with, like, the meal. Like,
it was the meal. The hospital tray with the toothpick.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Oh, my God.
It really was. So, they don't remember. When you're a little kid, they don't know. You go in there and they're playing and they're at the sand table or whatever, they don't know. But, like there would be things, like my son would look out the window and wave and there's nothing there. Or, it was like stuff like that. He's sitting over here. I have the picture. Can you get me the picture? They're on the table. I'll show you. They're on the kitchen table. Sorry.
I could have pictures.
I have pictures of my kids when they were there, when they were 2.
I'm excited.
That's great.
Little nuggets.
I don't know if you can even.
Oh, wait. Oh, you got to go back.
You have to put your hands around it when you.
Put my hands around it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, look at that. That's so
cute. So that's one here. But you could see like the old great, like, here. Oh, this way. Mm-hmm. You can see that, and then like you could see that there was no room. It was just you could just see it's just a square building, and like you could see. I mean, I know they have bars on the window, but you could see the bars on the outside too.
You can.
You see the bars on the inside for the kids, but then you see the bars on the outside.
It was an institution. That's indicative of
that was the asylum then.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It was one of the lower buildings, yeah.
One of the lower buildings. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the asylum, So that one, I have another one, but it's them with Santa Claus. You really can't tell. But yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of the activity centered around the asylum, but has there been any stories from the jail part of the grounds?
I haven't done enough research, but I have heard that it's called White Rock up there. Some of the White Rock people have said, because of course, before this, I was like, just curious, let me check it out. And there's been some stories of it being a little creepy up there too, but nothing consistent where I would say this, that, or the other that I've heard, but not much. But I also research that as much. I have to. It's on my to-do list.
Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like the inmates honestly didn't have it too bad. If they were able to work the farm and be outside on the grounds, like that's probably not the worst prison story I've ever heard for the inmates,
Yeah.
unless things went down at night.
Well, I'm sure they did. It was a prison.
Yep, possible.
Very possible.
That's awesome. Well, we're getting to the point, our hour mark here, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So, is there any particular story that we haven't discussed tonight that kind of stands out in your head that you wanted to tell us about?
On a side note, just a fun local story. When the facility, before it totally closed and they tore it down, the superintendent's building, they used to make that the haunted house for Halloween. And you could pay money to go in there. And do you remember this?
Yeah.
So that's just like a fun little thing. Like, let's just, you know what? All these ghost people came in. Let's market on it. Let's make
They
that.
just they leaned in and
They
went,
They leaned in all the way.
And let me tell you, it was creepy.
I would imagine. It sounds like, Carrie keeps saying how it's a bit like traumatic living it, but it, sounds like my kind of vibe, my kind of jam.
I'll let you know if it's for sale on my block. You can walk there. Literally, I could throw rocks. It's so close.
That's so funny.
Yeah, and the next time you come over, I will take you through.
Yeah.
Oh,
We should do like a little team tour of the Overbrook.
We'll go pick up Melissa.
Yes.
We'll go through.
That sounds like a great
metal
time.
detector this time.
I have a metal detector. Get the metal detector.
Maybe a pendulum as we're walking around, see if it like attracts anything.
Then take her through the cemetery over by Morgan's Farm.
Yeah, that's a cool spot too. We gotta talk about that one day. Morgan's Farm.
Next time, okay.
It was so cool. We'll talk.
We'll have to do a part 2 where we actually are on site filming, and that would be kind of an awesome YouTube video to be able to do.
That would. But Melissa, our tour guide, with the big hand, with the big finger of the flag following around.
Yes. That sounds like fun, actually.
Yeah, I'll be prepared.
That sounds like so much fun. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to spend your evening with us and tell us some of your stories and the history of Overbrook. It's been so much fun. And now I'm looking forward to more. So thank you so much.
This was awesome. I had a good time.
It was a lot of fun. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to like, comment, and share this video, and also subscribe. Click the little bell to get the notifications on our future videos. And once again, thank you, Melissa, for sharing your knowledge and insight regarding Overbrook Asylum in North Jersey. And until next time, English. Until next time, guys. Have fun, stay curious, and talk soon.
Bye.